The dust outside the medical clinic turned red under the setting sun. Dr. Richard Foster wrapped the last bandage around the miner's broken arm, his hands moving with practiced efficiency. The small building hummed with the sound of old equipment, and the air smelled like antiseptic and the dry earth that covered everything on Redstone Mesa. "Keep it elevated for the next 3 days," Richard said to the miner named George. "Come back if the swelling gets worse." George nodded his thanks and headed toward the door. Before he could reach it, the entire building shook. Medical supplies rattled on their shelves. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. Outside, something massive had landed. The ground sensors screamed warnings across every screen in the clinic. George froze, his good hand reaching for the pulse rifle at his belt. 2 other miners who had been waiting there jumped to their feet, weapons drawn. "Easy," Richard said, moving toward the reinforced window. "Let me see what we're dealing with." He pressed his face against the thick glass and felt his breath catch in his throat. A creature stood in the red dust outside, its body blocking out half the sky. Black scales covered its enormous form, each one the size of a dinner plate. Wings folded against its sides, easily spanning 50 meters if fully extended. For legs, each ending in claws that could tear through steel. A long neck curved upward, holding a head crowned with horns dotted drachma. A real, living dragon from the old stories. "Sweet mercy," George whispered behind her. "Those things are supposed to be extinct." "Not extinct," Olivia said quietly. "Just hidden. They don't come near human settlements." The dragon's head lowered toward the clinic window, eyes like molten gold fixed on Richard. Then a voice entered his mind, not as sound but as pure thought that bypassed his ears entirely. The mental touch was gentle despite its urgency. "Please, my child needs help." Richard saw the dragon's front claws shift, revealing something small held carefully against its chest. A baby dragon, no larger than a human child, with silver blue scales that caught the dying light. One of its wings hung at an odd angle, the delicate membrane torn and bleeding. "It's hurt," Richard said aloud. "The baby is injured. We should call for backup," one of the miners said, his rifle trained on the window. "Get the Colonial Guard out here." "And tell them what?" Olivia asked. "That we shot at a protected species? That we turned away a mother asking for medical help." The dragon's voice touched her mind again, more desperate this time. "I have searched for help across 3 star systems. My kind cannot heal this wound. But humans, I have heard stories. You save creatures not your own. You heal beings that others fear. Please, she will die without flight. She will die alone." Olivia looked at the small dragon in its mother's claws. The baby's eyes were half closed with pain. Its chest rose and fell rapidly, too fast, breathing labored. The torn wing twitched, and the baby made a sound that didn't need telepathy to understand. It was crying. She thought of her wife, Isabel, gone 3 years now. Isabel, who had spent her life studying alien species, who believed that every creature deserved compassion regardless of what world it came from. Isabel, who had died trying to rescue a transport full of alien workers when her ship lost power. "Put your weapons down," Richard said firmly. "Doc, that thing could kill us all in seconds," George protested. "Yes, it could," Richard agreed. "But it won't. It's a mother trying to save her child. I know something about that kind of desperation." He grabbed his medical kit from the counter and walked to the door. The miners shouted protests behind him, but he ignored them. The door hissed open, and he stepped into the cooling evening air. The dragon was even larger up close. Its breath washed over Richard like wind from furnace. He approached slowly, his kit held in both hands, trying to project calmness he didn't entirely feel. "My name is Richard," he said aloud. "I'm a doctor. Will you let me examine your child?" The dragon lowered its claws to the ground. The baby dragon lay in the dust, whimpering. Richard knelt beside it, setting down his kit. The little dragon's wing was badly damaged, a tear running through the thin membrane that extended from shoulder to hip. Blood seeped from the wound, dark against the silver-blue scales. "This is severe," Richard said, probing gently around the injury. "The membrane is torn through multiple layers. I'll need to do surgery. Use synthetic graphs. It's going to take time. Can you save her? The dragon's mental voice asked, and Richard heard 3,000 years of pride humbled by a parent's fear. I can try, Richard said honestly. I've never worked on a drachma before, but the basic principles should be the same. I'll need to take her inside, sedate her, work through the night, probably. The great dragon was silent for a long moment. Then she lowered her massive head until it was level with Richard's face. Those golden eyes studied him with an intelligence that was ancient and vast. I am called Sarenth, the voice said in his mind, and I am trusting you with the most precious thing in my universe. Please do not fail her. Richard carefully lifted the baby dragon. It was heavier than it looked, but manageable. The little one's eyes opened briefly, fixing on Richard's face before closing again. I'll do everything I can, Richard promised. He carried the wounded baby into his clinic while behind him, the mother dragon settled into the dust to wait. The last rays of sunlight gleamed on black scales as the ancient creature began her vigil. The surgery lamp cast harsh white light across the operating table. Richard bent over the small dragon, his magnification visor pulled down over his eyes. The baby's wings stretched out before him, held in place by careful positioning and soft restraints. Through the window, he could see the silhouette of Sarenth against the star-filled sky, unmoving as a statue. 3 hours had passed since he began. The sedative had worked better than he hoped, dropping the baby into a deep sleep within minutes. Now came the delicate work. The wing membrane was unlike any tissue Richard had seen before. Under magnification, he could see structures that resembled blood vessels, but carried something else, something that glowed faintly blue. The membrane itself was layered, tough outer skin protecting delicate inner structures that seemed to generate tiny pulses of energy. Anti-gravity cells, he murmured to himself. That's how something this size can fly. He selected a micro-suture from his surgical kit, thread so fine it was barely visible to the naked eye. His hands moved with steady precision, drawing the torn edges of the membrane together. Each stitch had to be perfect. Too tight, and the tissue would tear again. Too loose, and it wouldn't heal properly. George appeared in the doorway, carrying a cup of coffee. He set it down on the counter without speaking, then left. The other miners had gone home hours ago, but George stayed, keeping watch outside. That a voice entered Richard's mind, gentle enough not to startle him during the delicate work. Sarenth's thoughts came like distant music. You have steady hands. Had a lot of practice, Richard responded silently, finding that thinking his reply was enough. Frontier medicine requires precision. Out here, we can't afford mistakes. I have lived 3,000 years, Sarenth's thoughts continued. I have watched civilizations rise and crumble to dust. I have seen wonders beyond counting and horrors that would break lesser minds. Yet I have never seen a creature quite like your kind. Richard finished another suture and reached for a patch of synthetic membrane, material designed to repair human lung tissue. He hoped it would work with dragon physiology. What do you mean? He asked. Most species evolve one path, Sarenth explained. They become strong or smart, fast or resilient, but they rarely develop the ability to care for those different from themselves. My people, the Drachmer, care for our own fiercely. But others? We observe. We collect. We remember. We do not intervene. The patch adhered to the wing membrane, bonding at the molecular level. Richard used a neural stimulator to encourage the dragon's own cells to accept the foreign material. The tissue began to knit together, faster than human healing, but following similar patterns. Humans are different, Sarenth continued. I have heard stories. A human merchant who lost profit to rescue workers of a species he'd never met. A human soldier who carried an enemy's wounded from a battlefield. A human child who cried for creatures that her own people hunted. I thought these were lies. Propaganda, perhaps. No species could truly be that way. Richard moved to another section of the tear, his hands never stopping their careful work. We're not perfect. Humans do terrible things too. We fight wars. We destroy. We make mistakes that cost lives. Yes, Sarenth agreed. I have seen that as well. But you also have this This thing you're doing now. No gain for yourself. No advantage to your people. Just a mother's plea and a child's pain, and you work through the night to heal." The conversation fell into silence as Richard focused on the most difficult part of the repair. The tear extended into the joint where the wing connected to the body, affecting nerves and what looked like energy channels. One wrong move could permanently cripple the wing. He thought about Sarah while he worked. His wife had believed so strongly in building bridges between species. Sarah used to say that the universe was too vast and too strange for anyone to face alone. That connection was what separated survival from truly living. "I lost my wife 3 years ago," Richard said quietly, his thoughts flowing to Sarenth. "She was a xenobiologist. Died in a rescue attempt. Sometimes I wonder if this work, helping others, is just my way of keeping her dream alive." "That is not a small thing," Sarenth responded. "To honor the dead by living as they wished. To carry forward their hopes. Among my people, this is considered the highest form of love." Hours passed. Richard worked without stopping, occasionally sipping the coffee George had brought. The repairs slowly came together. Synthetic patches bonded with living tissue. Sutures held torn edges in perfect alignment. The neural stimulator encouraged regeneration of the damaged energy channels. Finally, as dawn light began to creep through the window, Richard stepped back. The wing was whole again. Not perfect, marked by the fine lines of repair work, but functional. The membrane would be slightly different from its twin, perhaps requiring the baby to adjust its flying technique. But it would work. That he applied healing gel to the entire repair, a thick blue substance that would protect the tissue and accelerate the final stages of healing. Then he carefully suspended the wing in a light support frame, keeping it extended but not stressed. The baby dragon stirred, making soft chirping sounds in its sleep. Richard stroked the small head, feeling the warmth of scales under his palm. "Done," he whispered as he walked outside into the pre-dawn light. Sarentha's great head turned toward him immediately, golden eyes intense with worry. "Your daughter will fly again," Richard said aloud. "The repair is complete. She'll need recovery time and physical therapy, but the wing will heal strong." The ancient dragon's eyes closed. When they opened again, Richard saw moisture gathering at the corners. "You have done what the greatest Drachma healers said was impossible." Sarentha's thoughts carried waves of gratitude. "I will remember this. My people will remember. You have my eternal thanks, Richard Foster." 20 days had passed since the surgery. The baby dragon, whom Richard had started calling Sky after watching the little one stare longingly at the clouds, was healing faster than expected. The small dragon followed Richard everywhere around the clinic, chirping happily whenever he entered the room. Sarenth had made her den in the canyon walls half a mile from the settlement. The massive dragon could be seen each morning, perched on the cliffs like a dark monument against the rising sun. She visited twice daily to check on her child and to share what she called her knowledge debt. The miners no longer feared her. George had even built a special harness to support Sky's wing during exercise sessions, fashioned from mining cables and soft padding. Other workers brought water and scraps of meat for the baby dragon, though Sky preferred the synthetic protein bars from Richard Supplies. "Lift slowly," Richard instructed as Sky spread both wings in the clinic's expanded recovery area. The baby dragon extended the repaired wing carefully, the synthetic patches now fully bonded with living tissue. The membrane stretched without tearing, holding firm. Sky chirped with pride and attempted a small hop, wings flapping. The movement was clumsy, but showed progress. A week ago, the baby couldn't lift the repaired wing at all. "Good," Richard praised. "Now fold them back gently." A presence touched his mind. Sarentha's thoughts carried warmth and something else, a deep satisfaction. "She grows stronger each day. You have given her back her future." Richard smiled, watching Sky chase a light reflection across the floor with enthusiastic pounces. "She's a quick learner. The wing should be strong enough for flight attempts in another week." That afternoon, Sarenth descended from her cliff perch and landed near the clinic. Several miners had gathered, no longer to defend, but to listen. The ancient dragon had taken to sharing stories in the evenings, projecting images directly into willing minds. Today she spoke of the Velener Collective, a federation of 12 species that had thrived for 2,000 years before collapsing into civil war. She showed images of their beautiful crystal cities, their advances in science and art, and then the fires that consumed everything when truth became less important than comfort. The miners listened in awed silence. When the story ended, a young worker named Annie asked, "Why did they fall?" "They forgot to value honesty," Sarenth explained. "They told themselves pleasant lies until the lies became their reality. When crisis came, they had no foundation of truth to stand upon." Another miner, an older woman named Patricia, brought her daughter to meet Sky that week. The little girl, maybe 7 years old, approached the baby dragon with wide eyes and an outstretched hand. Sky sniffed her fingers, then gently nuzzled against her palm. The child giggled. "She's soft. I thought dragons would be scary." "Everything seems scary until you know it better," Richard said gently. Patricia pulled Richard aside later. "Thank you for this, for showing us there's more to the galaxy than just work and survival." My daughter drew pictures of Sky all night. She wants to be a xenobiologist now. The words hit Richard harder than expected. Sarah's dream, spreading to a new generation through one act of compassion. During the third week, Sarenth began teaching Richard about canyon plants with medicinal properties unknown to human science. She showed him a moss that could accelerate bone healing and a flower whose pollen worked as a powerful antibiotic. Richard documented everything carefully, knowing this knowledge could save lives across human space. "Why share all this?" Richard asked during one session. "This knowledge must be precious to your people." "Knowledge hoarded is knowledge wasted," Sarenth replied. "I have lived long enough to see civilizations die because they refused to share what they knew. Besides, you saved my daughter. This is not payment. Payment would insult what you did. This is sharing between friends." Sky's progress continued. The baby dragon began attempting longer wing extensions, holding them steady for minutes at a time. The repaired membrane showed slight discoloration where the patches had bonded, but flexed and moved with the same strength as the undamaged wing. George worked with Richard to design exercise equipment. They created a harness system that allowed Sky to practice flying motions while suspended safely above the ground. The baby dragon took to it eagerly, wings beating with increasing power. "She'll be ready soon," George observed. "Stronger than I expected." "She wants to fly," Richard said, watching Sky struggle against the harness, trying to gain real altitude. "It's instinct." That evening, Sarenth shared a troubling piece of information with Richard alone. They stood outside the clinic under a sky full of unfamiliar stars. "There are forces in the galaxy that view your species with hostility," the ancient dragon said. "The Krell Dominion, in particular. They have ruled through division and subjugation for 10,000 years. Your kind's ability to unite different species threatens their power structure." "We're just trying to survive out here," Richard said. "You're doing more than surviving. You are building connections. The Krell fear that. I have heard whispers through the old networks. They plan to isolate humanity, to turn potential allies against you before you become too strong." Richard felt a chill despite the warm night air. "Why tell me this?" "Because I believe your kind has potential that should not be snuffed out by ancient empires too afraid of change. And because I intend to do something about it." Sarenth turned her massive head toward the canyon depths. "Tomorrow, I want to show you something. A place I have kept secret for centuries. You should bring supplies for a day's journey." "What's out there?" Richard asked. "Hope," Sarenth replied simply, "and warnings, and tools that humanity may need in the days ahead." Sky appeared in the clinic doorway, chirping for attention. The baby dragon had learned to open the simple latch, another sign of growing intelligence and coordination. Richard picked up the little dragon, feeling the warmth of scales against his chest. "All right, tomorrow we'll see what secrets you've been keeping." In the starlight, Sarenth's eyes gleamed with something that might have been relief. The journey into the deep canyons began at sunrise. Richard rode on Sarenth's back, Strapped into a harness the dragon had fashioned from flexible scales shed over centuries. Sky flew alongside them, wings working hard to keep pace with the mother's effortless gliding. The repaired wing held perfectly. Sky had to adjust the flying technique slightly, compensating for the synthetic patch's different flexibility, but the baby dragon adapted quickly. Each wing beat grew more confident. They flew deeper into unmapped territory, past rock formations that twisted into impossible shapes and valleys where human scanners had never reached. The air grew cooler and thinner. Richard's breath came faster, but Sarenth adjusted her altitude to keep the human passenger comfortable. After 2 hours, they descended toward a waterfall that cascaded down a cliff face, the water glowing faintly blue from mineral content. Sarenth flew directly at the falling water, and Richard tensed. But the last moment, the water parted around them like a curtain. Behind the waterfall lay a cave entrance sealed with invisible force. Sarenth made a low rumbling sound, and the barrier dissolved. They passed into darkness that gradually brightened as the walls themselves began to glow with soft light. The cave opened into a chamber so vast that Richard couldn't see the far walls. And everywhere, covering every surface, were objects. Technology from 100 different civilizations filled the space. Ancient computers sat beside primitive weapons. Art pieces depicting beings Richard had never seen shared space with scientific instruments that hummed with dormant power. Everything was preserved in perfect condition within shimmering stasis fields. "This is my hoard," Sarenth said as they landed. "Not treasure in your sense. This is memory. This is warning. This is hope." Sky immediately bounded off to explore, chirping with excitement at the strange new environment. Richard dismounted carefully, his legs unsteady after the long flight. He approached a crystalline structure that pulsed with inner light. "What is all this?" "Remnants of the dead," Sarenth replied. "I have collected these items over 3 millennia. Each piece represents a civilization that rose to greatness and fell to ruin. I keep them so their mistakes will not be forgotten, so their achievements will not vanish completely from the universe." Sarenth led Richard through the collection, sharing stories with each artifact. A weapon from the Resh Empire, who conquered half the galaxy before destroying themselves in civil war. A child's toy from the Venari, peaceful explorers wiped out by fearful neighbors. A data core from the Velener Collective, whose internal corruption led to collapse. "I see patterns," Sarenth explained, her mental voice heavy with age. The same mistakes repeated across thousands of years by different species. The same fears, the same greed, the same inability to value what they had until it was gone. Richard touched a musical instrument, its surface cool beneath his fingers. "And you see these patterns in humanity?" "Some, yes. Your rapid expansion, your internal conflicts, your weapons development. But I also see differences, crucial differences." Sarenth showed him a display of human history, images drawn from public records and observations. Humans rescuing animals from natural disasters. Humans creating sanctuaries for endangered alien species. Humans forming friendships with beings that looked nothing like them. Humans questioning their own actions, writing stories about their failures, teaching their children to be better. "This capacity for empathy beyond your own kind," Sarenth said, "is rare. Perhaps unique in my experience." She led Richard to a section of the cave set apart from the rest. Here sat objects different from the others, glowing with subtle power. "I want you to choose items to take back to your leaders," Sarenth said. "Tools that might help humanity avoid the fates of those who came before." Richard felt overwhelmed by the responsibility. He moved slowly through the selection, examining each piece carefully. He chose a medical data core containing knowledge from 6 different species, a diplomatic archive from a civilization that maintained peace for 3,000 years, a warning beacon detailing the Krell Dominion's tactics and weaknesses. Wise choices, Sarenth approved. "But I have one more to add." The ancient dragon retrieved a metallic sphere covered in intricate patterns that seemed to shift when viewed directly. "This is a connection node, created by the architects who came before even my earliest ancestors. It allows instantaneous communication across any distance and can link minds of different species, creating perfect understanding. Richard accepted the sphere carefully. This must be incredibly valuable. It is one of 3 that still exist, Sarenth confirmed. I am entrusting it to humanity because I believe you will use it wisely. Sky returned from exploring, carrying a small holographic projector. When activated, it showed images of a beautiful world covered in oceans, with floating cities and beings that looked like a cross between dolphins and birds. Sarenth's mental voice grew sad. The Corial, my closest friends from 2,000 years ago. A plague took them, something their medicine could not cure. I often wonder if someone like you had been there, if it might have made a difference. Richard put a hand on the dragon's massive foreleg. I'm sorry for your loss. This is why I am doing this, Sarenth said. Why I am breaking my people's isolation after 1,000 years. Because I see in humanity the potential to be what the Corial were. Bridge builders, healers, friends to those who are different. She lowered her massive head until it was level with Richard's face. I formally declare you kin friend, Richard Foster. This title has not been given to a non-Drachmer in 5 centuries. It means you and your descendants can call upon my people in times of need. It means we will watch humanity's path with hope rather than distant observation. Sarenth touched her forehead gently to Richard's. A rush of memories flooded through the connection. Richard saw civilizations rise and fall, witnessed wonders and horrors spanning millennia, felt the weight of ages and the burden of hope that Sarenth carried for humanity's future. When the connection broke, Richard found tears on his cheeks. I'll do my best to be worthy of this trust. You already have, Sarenth replied simply. 3 months after the journey to the hidden cave, the settlement on Redstone Mesa had changed in ways nobody could have predicted. The ancient relics sat in secure storage beneath Richard's expanded clinic, waiting for transport to Earth's leadership. But their influence had already begun spreading across human space. Richard stood in his new office, larger than the cramped room he used before. The Settlement Council had approved funding for a proper hospital, one that would serve multiple species. Construction had already begun on the foundation. The medical data core had been copied and distributed to research facilities across the colonies. In just 3 months, doctors had developed treatments for 2 diseases that had plagued human settlements for decades. The diplomatic archives were being studied by Earth's best negotiators, learning techniques from a civilization that had maintained peace for 3,000 years. Most importantly, the warning beacon's information about the Krell Dominion had changed the political landscape. Earth's leadership had quietly shared the data with other species wary of Krell expansion. Alliances were forming, not built on fear, but on mutual interest in resisting authoritarian control. Doc, you've got another visitor, George called from the reception area. Richard looked up to see Sky padding into his office. The young dragon was now the size of a small shuttle, scales gleaming silver blue in the artificial light. The repaired wings showed only faint marks where the surgery had been performed. Both wings folded perfectly against the dragon's sides. Sky nuzzled against Richard's hand, making a purring sound that vibrated through the floor. The baby dragon, no longer quite so baby, had become a fixture around the settlement. Children played near Sky without fear. Miners shared their lunch breaks with the young dragon, who had developed a taste for the protein bars from the supply depot. Your mother's coming by today, Richard asked, scratching behind Sky's horns. Sky sent a simple affirmative thought, the telepathic communication growing clearer as the young dragon matured. Sarenth arrived at midday, her massive form casting shadows across the entire settlement. But now people waved in greeting rather than reaching for weapons. The ancient dragon had become a teacher, sharing knowledge freely with anyone willing to learn. Today, she brought news. The Drachmer Council has convened. Sarenth's thoughts reached everyone in the settlement who was willing to listen. For the first time in 5 centuries, my people have gathered to discuss ending our isolation. The vote was unanimous. We will establish formal relations with humanity. Cheers erupted from the miners and workers who had gathered. Richard felt a surge of emotion, understanding the magnitude of what this meant. Your actions began this, Sarenth said privately to Richard. One act of compassion has rippled outward in ways you cannot yet imagine. Later that afternoon, something unexpected happened. A Krell shuttle requested permission to land. The insectoid species rarely ventured to frontier worlds, preferring to conduct business from their heavily fortified stations. The Krell ambassador who emerged was smaller than Richard expected, his carapace marked with symbols of rank. He was escorted by 2 soldiers, but they kept their weapons holstered. I wish to speak with Dr. Richard Foster, the ambassador said, his translator device rendering his clicking speech into standard language. Richard met him outside the clinic. Sarenth watched from a respectful distance, ready to intervene if needed. I am Ambassador Trell, the Krell said. I come with a question that my superiors would punish me for asking, but I must know. Why did you save the dragon? Richard considered his answer carefully. Because a child was hurt and needed help. That's all. Trell stood silent for a long moment, his compound eyes unreadable. In 10,000 years of Krell history, we have records of great battles won, of territories conquered, of enemies crushed. But we have no story like this. No instance of someone helping another being simply because it was right. He turned to look at Sarenth, then back to Richard. This troubles me greatly. It suggests there are ways of gaining influence we have never considered. Ways that do not require force or threat. Friendship is stronger than fear, Richard said quietly. Fear makes temporary allies. Friendship makes permanent ones. Trell departed without another word, but Richard could see him thinking as his shuttle lifted away. A seed of doubt planted in the mind of an empire built on domination. That evening, Sarenth revealed one final secret to Richard. They stood alone outside the settlement, stars bright overhead. The connection node I gave you has a special function I did not mention before, Sarenth said. If activated in a moment of true crisis, it can call every drachmer in the galaxy simultaneously. It is a signal we have never given to another species. Richard felt the weight of that trust. You're giving humanity the ability to summon your entire people. I am trusting that you will only use it if the galaxy itself is at stake, Sarenth confirmed. This is a gamble. My people are not warriors by nature, but we are old and powerful, and our support could change the course of any conflict. Why take this risk? Richard asked. Because I have lived long enough to recognize a turning point in history. Humanity stands at a crossroads. You could follow the path of the Krell, ruling through strength and fear. Or you could become something new, something the galaxy has not seen before. Bridge builders, healers, friends to all who seek peace. Sky approached, settling down beside them. The young dragon's presence reminded Richard of where this had all started. One injured child, one desperate mother, one choice to help. I'll make sure the right people know about this, Richard promised. And I'll do everything I can to make sure we're worthy of your trust. You already are, Sarenth replied. Now you must convince the rest of your species to follow your example. Above them, ships began arriving in orbit. The first official drachmer delegation in 1,000 years, coming to establish relations with humanity. And it had all started because one doctor chose compassion over fear. 2 years had passed since that first night when Sarenth landed outside the clinic with her wounded child. The settlement on Redstone Mesa had transformed into something nobody could have imagined. What was once a dusty mining outpost had become a center for interspecies cooperation and learning. The Sarah Foster Memorial Hospital stood where Richard's small clinic once operated. Named after his late wife, the facility now treated patients from 17 different species. Doctors came from across human space to train here, learning techniques that combined human medicine with knowledge from the Drachmer archives. Richard walked through the hospital corridors, reviewing patient charts on his datapad. A Venari engineer recovering from a mining accident. A human child with a rare genetic disorder being treated with techniques from the medical data core. A Quillari merchant whose species had joined the growing alliance of worlds that opposed Krell expansion. In the courtyard outside, Sky practiced aerial maneuvers with a group of younger dragons. The adolescent Drachmer had become an unofficial ambassador, traveling with Sarenth to diplomatic meetings across the galaxy. The repaired wing showed no signs of weakness. If anything, Sky flew with more grace than dragons who had never been injured, having learned to adapt and compensate in ways that made flight more efficient. George found Richard in his office during lunch break. The old miner had retired from mining to become the hospital's maintenance director. He set down a cup of coffee on his desk. "Ship's coming in," he said, gesturing toward the window. "Big delegation from Earth. They're saying the Coalition wants to make this place an official interspecies medical center." Richard nodded, unsurprised. The work they were doing here had attracted attention across human space and beyond. The hospital had saved lives that would have been lost to misunderstanding or lack of knowledge about alien biology. But the real change went deeper than medicine. The story of the doctor who saved a dragon had spread across the galaxy, carried by traders and travelers. It had become a story told to human children learning about compassion, a case study in diplomatic classes, and a symbol of what could be achieved through simple kindness. Richard had heard reports from across human space. A mechanic who spent his savings to rescue an endangered colony of insectoid beings. A teacher who started a program connecting human students with young aliens. A cargo pilot who volunteered to transport medical supplies to frontier worlds. Small acts of kindness, inspired by one moment of choosing to help. That afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. Ambassador Trell returned to Redstone Mesa, but this time without military escort. The Krell diplomat requested a private meeting with Richard. They sat in his office, an odd pairing. The insectoid ambassador and the human doctor. "I have been recalled to the Krell homeworld," Trell said without preamble. "My superiors believe I have become too sympathetic to human perspectives. They are likely correct." "I'm sorry to hear that," Richard said genuinely. "Do not be. I volunteered for reassignment." Trell's translator rendered his clicking speech with what might have been weariness. "I have spent the past 2 years studying your species, observing how you interact with others. Your alliance grows not through conquest, but through friendship. This should not work according to everything the Krell Empire understands about power. Yet it does." He stood, pacing to the window where Sky could be seen playing with young dragons in the sky. "I am returning home to teach at our diplomatic academy," Trell continued. "I will share what I have learned here. Many will resist. The Krell way has endured for 10,000 years. But I believe change is possible, even for my people. You have shown me that." After Trell departed, Richard found Sarenth waiting outside. The ancient dragon had become a regular presence at the hospital, sometimes sharing knowledge, sometimes simply observing. "The Krell Empire has begun internal debates about their policies," Sarenth said. "Your actions 2 years ago planted seeds that are now growing in unexpected places." Richard shook his head, still amazed by how far things had spread. "I just helped an injured child. You did more than that. You chose compassion when fear would have been easier. You chose to help when indifference would have been safer." That choice echoed across the galaxy. Sky landed nearby, now nearly as large as Sarenth, though still young by Drachmer standards. The dragon nuzzled Richard affectionately, a gesture that had become familiar over the years. "I have something for you," Sarenth said, offering Richard a scale that had fallen naturally during Sky's growth. "Among my people, this marks the deepest friendship. Sky wishes you to have it." Richard accepted the scale, feeling its warmth. It shimmered with the same silver-blue color as Sky's hide, beautiful and unique. That evening, Richard stood on the hospital roof, watching the sunset paint the canyon walls in shades of red and gold. He thought about Sarah, about how proud his wife would be of what had grown from one choice to help. The United Earth Coalition had officially recognized the hospital as an interspecies medical center. The Drachmer had ended 1,000 years of isolation. New alliances formed across the galaxy, built on cooperation rather than conquest. And somewhere out there, people were choosing kindness over fear, inspired by a story about a doctor and a dragon. George joined him on the roof, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He offered one to Richard. "You ever think about how different things would be if you'd turned them away that first night?" he asked. Richard smiled, sipping the coffee. "Every day. But I didn't. And neither did you," when you built that harness for Sky. Or Patricia when she brought her daughter to meet a dragon. Or anyone else in this settlement who chose to be better than their fears. Above them, Sky's sword passed, wings catching the last light of day. The repaired wing moved perfectly in sync with its twin, a testament to healing and hope. Humanity's future changed because of what happened here, George said. Maybe, Richard replied. But it only happened because we chose to care. One life at a time. One moment of compassion at a time. That's all it ever takes to change the galaxy. The stars emerged overhead, infinite and bright, full of possibilities that kindness had unlocked.